The halls of Vorthan Prime's lower prison were colder than the night outside. The walls reflected faint glimmers of the dim lights, creating shadows that stretched long and silent. For years, prisoners had walked those halls with bowed heads, hearts dulled by despair. But tonight, one corner of the prison held something different, a spark of courage. Commander Elias Ward moved carefully along the narrow corridors. Every step was calculated, every turn memorized. Months of observing schedules, guard patrols, and security protocols had led to this moment. He carried only what was necessary, a small pack of supplies and the determination to free Irina, the Valari woman who had stolen a place in his heart. Irina waited in her cell, the small scarf he had given her wrapped around her shoulders. The light he had left flickered faintly, casting soft shadows over the room. She had guessed something was happening tonight when he arrived earlier in the day, moving more urgently than ever before. Her eyes met his across the cell. "Is it time?" she whispered. Elias nodded. "It's now or never." Fear flickered in her gaze. "If they catch you?" He shook his head. "We won't let them. Stay calm. Trust me." For a long moment she studied his face. Something in his calm determination reassured her. She had felt fear all her life, but this was different. This was hope, fragile, shining, real. She nodded. "I trust you." The cell door hissed open and Elias stepped inside. He moved quickly to release her chains, simple restraints yet heavy with years of symbolism. "You free?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Not fully," he said with a small smile, "but soon. Step lightly and follow me." Together they moved into the corridor. Every shadow felt alive. Guards were not far away and cameras lined the walls. But Elias had memorized the patrol routes. They slipped past the first checkpoint, hearts beating, breath shallow. Irina had never been outside the lower cells at night. The hallways were long and strange, lit only by faint emergency lights. She clung to Elias's hand, afraid but determined. "Keep calm," he whispered. "We are almost there." As they turned a corner, the first obstacle appeared, a group of guards patrolling the area where transport shuttles were kept. Elias crouched behind a stack of crates. "Stay low," he instructed. Irina obeyed instinctively. Her eyes widened as she saw the guards pass within feet of them. She felt a surge of adrenaline, and for the first time in years she understood the taste of fear mixed with courage. Elias waited until the guards moved out of sight. "Now," he whispered, leading her forward. Step by step they moved closer to the exit bay. The shuttle that would carry them away sat waiting, its engines silent, its hull gleaming under the faint light. A sudden sound made them freeze. A metallic clang echoed down the corridor. Irina's heart leapt into her throat. "Stay calm," Elias said firmly. "Breathe." She did as he said, though every nerve in her body screamed. The sound faded. A careless guard had dropped a tool, nothing more. Elias motioned her forward and they moved again, slower now, every step deliberate. When they reached the shuttle, Elias activated the boarding panel. The door hissed open, revealing the interior, warm, safe, and bright compared to the dark corridors behind them. Irina stepped inside, still trembling. "This is real?" she asked softly. "Yes," he replied. "You are free." The engines roared to life, a gentle vibration beneath their feet. The shuttle lifted slowly, carrying them away from the prison and the shadows that had held her for so long. Irina pressed her hands against the glass, looking down at the world below. For the first time in years, she saw lights that weren't cold or harsh. She saw a city that glittered under the stars, not in chains but in movement and life. Tears filled her eyes. I never thought—" "You thought it was impossible," Elias said softly. "But here you are. You are stronger than you know." She blinked, trying to process the feeling of freedom. Chains weren't just physical, she realized. They had been in her mind, in her heart. Now, both were gone. The shuttle moved higher above the atmosphere of Vorthan Prime, and Irina could see the curvature of the planet. Colors she hadn't seen in years glowed on the surface, and blues, greens, and purples that shimmered like dreams. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is," Elias agreed. "And the universe is even bigger. You have a place in it, not as a prisoner, not as a number, but as yourself." She turned to him, searching his face. "Why do this for me?" He looked away for a moment, gazing at the stars. "Because no one deserves to suffer in silence. Because someone had to see you. And I was the one who could. Her eyes shone with gratitude. I never knew kindness like this existed. Well, he said with a small smile, maybe it was waiting for you all along. Below them, the prison lights became smaller, fading into the distance. Above them, the stars stretched endlessly, a promise of possibility and hope. Irina felt an emotion she hadn't felt in a long time. Excitement. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Elias checked the shuttle's systems as they entered a quiet corridor in space. We need to get to a safe colony, he said. Somewhere you can recover. Somewhere you can be yourself without fear. Irina nodded slowly. Somewhere. New, exactly, he said. And then we'll figure out the rest together. The journey wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, scanning sensors, close calls with patrols, and the constant awareness that Vorthan forces could pursue them. Each time, Elias's calm and steady guidance kept them moving forward. Irina learned to trust him completely. She had never trusted anyone before, not in years of captivity, but with Elias she felt a steady reassurance, a promise that someone cared enough to act. It was a strange feeling, almost foreign, not fear, not despair, but hope. By the time the shuttle reached a small colony on the edge of Human Alliance space, Irina was exhausted but unbroken. The landing bay was quiet and safe. Soft lights reflected on the walls, and the air smelled faintly of clean metal and earth-like gardens. Elias helped her step down from the shuttle. "We're here," he said. "You are safe now." She looked around, amazed. The world didn't feel hostile. The walls didn't feel like a cage. For the first time, she could breathe freely. I can't believe it," she whispered. "You can," he said. "Because you made it here. You survived. You were brave enough to follow hope." She held the pendant he had given her earlier, feeling its smooth surface against her palm. "You risk everything for me," she said softly. "I wouldn't call it risk," Elias replied. "I'd call it necessary. Everyone deserves mercy. Everyone deserves freedom." Irina felt tears run down her cheeks. She wasn't crying out of fear, but out of relief and gratitude. Years of suffering melted away with each heartbeat, replaced by the simple joy of living, breathing, walking, feeling, and being seen. She looked up at Elias. You saved me." "No," he said softly. "You saved yourself. I only showed you the door." She smiled faintly, understanding the truth in his words. It wasn't just his courage. It was her own. She had walked beside him. She had believed in the chance for freedom. And she had stepped into it. For the first time in years, she felt whole. As night fell over the colony, Irina and Elias walked together beneath artificial stars that glimmered like real ones. The world was quiet, peaceful, and safe. Somewhere out there, Vorthan Prime continued its routines, unaware that one of its prisoners had escaped, not through force but through trust, courage, and the quiet mercy of a human who had chosen to act. Irina realized something important. Freedom was not just leaving the chains behind. Freedom was being allowed to exist as a living being, with a heart and a soul. And in Elias's unwavering belief in her, she had found that freedom. She looked at him and whispered, I never thought kindness could feel like this." Elias smiled gently. "It can feel like this when someone truly sees you." For the first time in her life, Irina felt the stars inside her eyes again. They burned brightly, steady and warm, reflecting a future she had once thought impossible. And somewhere in that quiet corner of the universe, a bond had formed that no prison, no chains, no darkness could ever break. A bond of hope, trust, and the first true taste of freedom. Days turned into weeks, and weeks began to blend into months. The tunnels of Vorthan Prime remained dark and silent as ever, but in Cell 47, something new had begun to grow, a quiet friendship between two unlikely souls. Irina, the once forgotten prisoner, had slowly begun to speak again. Her voice was still soft, sometimes unsure, but it no longer trembled with fear. Every time Commander Elias Ward visited, she found the courage to say a few more words. To her, he wasn't just another uniform passing by. He was proof that kindness still existed in the galaxy. One morning, Elias entered the prison with a thoughtful look on his face. The guards saluted him, though their eyes showed confusion. They still couldn't understand why a decorated human officer spent his free hours talking to a captured alien. But Elias didn't care what they thought. He had brought something with him that day, the small metal box. He set it down near Irina's cell and pressed a button. A faint sound began to play, a simple melody from Earth, soft and peaceful. Irina tilted her head curiously. "What is that sound?" "It's called music," Elias said with a smile. "Something from my home." Her eyes widened slightly. "It feels alive." "Yes," he nodded. "It can make people remember who they are." She listened quietly, her expression slowly softening. For years she had known only silence, only the hum of machines and the heavy steps of guards. But now there was something beautiful again, something that touched her heart. When the melody ended, she closed her eyes for a moment, as if holding the sound inside her memory. "Valaris had songs too," she said softly. "I would like to hear one," Elias replied kindly. Her lips trembled a little. "I forget many, but maybe I can remember one small part." She took a slow breath and began to hum. The sound was faint at first, then grew stronger. A smooth, gentle tune that seemed to fill the cell with warmth. It had no words, yet it spoke more than any language. When she finished, Elias whispered, "That was beautiful." Irina lowered her eyes shyly. "I thought I lost it." "You didn't," he said softly. It was waiting for someone to listen. From that day onward, their conversations grew longer. Elias told her stories about Earth, about green forests, oceans that stretched for miles, and blue skies filled with birds. Irina listened with quiet wonder. In return, she told him about Lithora, her home moon. She described trees that glowed when touched, rivers that sang when the wind passed through them, and children who danced under the silver light of twin moons. Her words painted a picture so vivid that Elias could almost see it in his mind. Sometimes, they would share quiet moments without words. Just the sound of breathing and the soft hum of the light device he had given her. In those moments, Irina no longer felt like a prisoner, and Elias no longer felt like a soldier. They were simply two souls finding peace in a place that had forgotten what peace meant. But not everyone was pleased with this growing bond. Warden Krell, the Vorthon in charge of the prison, had begun to watch Elias closely. He noticed the extra supplies being sent to Cell 47 and the long minutes the human spent there. "This is not good," Krell muttered to his assistant. "The human grows too attached. Compassion makes men weak. Shall we report it to the council?" the assistant asked. "Not yet," Krell said darkly. "Let us see how far he goes." And so hidden cameras were placed and every visit was silently recorded. Meanwhile, Elias was unaware of the watchful eyes around him. He was too busy trying to understand the quiet ache in his heart. He had always followed orders, always believed that duty came before emotion. But now, when he looked at Irina, he saw not an enemy, not a mission, but a person who reminded him why he had joined the Alliance in the first place, to protect life, not just win wars. One evening he asked her gently, "Do you ever think of leaving this place?" Irina's expression changed. "Leave I cannot." "Why not?" he asked softly. She looked at her wrists where faint marks of old chains still remained. "I am property here. No one lets property go." Elias's jaw tightened. "You're not property, Irina. You're a living being. You deserve freedom." She gave a faint smile, a sad one. "Freedom is a dream. Dreams are safe only in sleep." He wanted to argue, to promise her that he would make it happen, but he stopped himself. Promises were easy. Action was hard. Still, something inside him knew he couldn't walk away anymore. He left that night with a new decision forming in his mind, one that could cost him everything. Over the next week, Elias began to gather information. Quietly, carefully, he searched through old archives about the prisoners taken during the Lithora campaign. The more he read, the angrier he became. Dozens of Valari had been brought to Vorthon Prime for scientific study. Most had not survived. Irina was one of the last. Officially, she didn't even exist anymore. Her name was erased from every record. He realized that even if he filed a report, no one would listen. The Alliance leaders wanted peace with the Vorthons too badly to risk a scandal. If he wanted to save her, he would have to do it himself. A few nights later, he went down to the lower tunnels again. The guards were used to his visits by now and didn't question him. When he entered Irina's cell, she looked surprised. "You come late," she said softly. "I couldn't wait," he said with a faint smile. Then he handed her something small. A folded piece of cloth. She opened it carefully. Inside was a small scarf made of soft blue fabric. "For me?" "Yes," he said. "It's from my planet. We wear it to keep warm." Irina touched it gently as if afraid it might vanish. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you," Elias smiled. "It looks better when you smile like that." Her face turned shy and she lowered her gaze, but she couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in years, she felt human again. Not because of what she was, but because someone treated her with dignity. The next day, however, trouble began to brew. Warden Krell called Elias into his office. The room was cold and full of shadows. "Commander Ward," he began, "your visits to the lower cells have become frequent." Elias met his gaze calmly. "I'm ensuring proper treatment of the prisoners. It's part of my duty." Krell's lips curved into a thin smile. "Proper treatment, yes, but some might see your attention as unnecessary, especially toward a Valari." "There is nothing unnecessary about kindness," Elias said quietly. Krell's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, human. Kindness can be dangerous when it clouds judgment." Elias stood tall. "If judgment means turning away from suffering, then perhaps it deserves to be clouded." For a long moment the two men stared at each other. Then Krell waved a hand dismissively. "Do as you wish, Commander. But remember, this is not your world." Elias left without another word. But deep down he knew the warning was real. Krell was planning something. That night, as Elias returned to Irina's cell, she could sense something was wrong. His usual calm was replaced by a quiet tension. "What happened?" she asked softly. "Nothing yet," he replied. "But I think they're watching us." Her eyes filled with worry. "Then you should not come. They will hurt you." He shook his head. "I can't stop now." Irina took a small step closer to the glass. "Why do this for me?" He looked at her and his voice softened. "Because no one else will. And because I believe you deserve a second chance." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "No one ever said that before." "Well," he said with a small smile, "then I'll be the first." That night, when Elias returned to his quarters, he began to plan. He studied the maps of the tunnels, memorized guard shifts, and located the transport exits that led to the surface. It would be difficult, dangerous, possibly impossible. But he didn't care. He had made up his mind. He would free her. Meanwhile, in her dark cell, Irina sat holding the scarf close to her chest. She looked at the small pendant he had given her earlier, the shining star of the human alliance, and whispered to herself, "He sees me." Not as a creature, but as a soul. Her voice trembled with hope. For the first time, she dared to dream again. And somewhere above her, Elias Ward looked out into the endless night sky and whispered his own promise. "No one should live in chains. Not while I still breathe." The galaxy outside slept peacefully, unaware that in a quiet corner of a forgotten world, two lives were about to change everything. One born of light, one born of sorrow. And together they would rewrite what it meant to be human. The following days on Vorthan Prime passed under a heavy sky. The air above the city shimmered with dust from the factories, and the lower tunnels remained cold and lifeless as always. Yet somewhere deep below in Cell 47, something had begun to change. Irina sat quietly in her corner, staring at the small light device that Commander Elias Ward had left behind. It was a tiny source of brightness, but to her, it felt like a piece of the stars had fallen into her hands. For the first time in years, she felt the warmth of gentle light instead of the cold glare of machines. Each day, the guards came as usual, silent, careless, moving with tired steps. They brought her food and water without looking at her, but she no longer felt completely invisible. Someone had looked at her and seen a living being, not a number. Her thoughts kept returning to the human officer, the one with calm eyes and a kind voice. She tried to remember the way he had smiled when he said she deserved to be treated like a person. Those words kept echoing in her heart. They were simple but powerful, and they gave her strength she didn't understand yet. Up on the surface, Commander Elias Ward was busy with meetings and reports. The peace treaty between the Human Alliance and the Vorton Dominion was fragile, and every small disagreement could ruin it. His fellow officers told him to focus on politics and not to get lost in local affairs. But he couldn't forget Cell 47. He kept seeing those blue eyes in his mind, tired, yet still alive. Whenever he looked at his reflection in the mirror, he found himself asking silent questions. Why was she there? Why had no one helped her? And most of all, what kind of peace were they building if it allowed such things to continue? During a quiet evening, he found himself walking again toward the lower tunnels. The guards saluted when they saw him. "Commander Ward, back for another inspection?" "Yes," he said simply. "I want to confirm something." He walked straight to the same door. The light inside was still glowing. Irina was awake, watching him silently through the glass. When their eyes met again, she flinched slightly, not in fear but in surprise. She hadn't expected him to return. Humans, she thought, never came twice to the same forgotten place. Elias stepped closer and smiled faintly. "Hello again," he said softly. "I wanted to make sure the light still works." Irina blinked, then nodded once. Her voice was rough and quiet when she spoke. "Still shines." He noticed her trying to form words. Her language wasn't perfect, but the effort touched him. "Good," he said gently. "It suits you." She looked confused. "Suit me?" "Yes," he said. "Because you shine too, Irina." Her eyes widened. "You no name?" He smiled again. "You told me once. That wasn't true." She had whispered it to herself when he had already left. But somehow he had guessed it right. The moment felt almost magical to her, like fate had whispered her name into his mind. "Irina," he repeated softly, and the sound of her name in his human voice filled her heart with something warm and strange. Over the next few days, Elias began to visit more often. He never stayed long, only a few minutes at a time, but every visit brought small pieces of kindness, a real meal, clean water, or a gentle word. At first, the guards laughed quietly behind his back. "The human commander talking to a prisoner," one said. "He's too soft for this place," but Elias ignored them. He believed that kindness was not weakness. It was strength that others had forgotten. Irina, on the other hand, didn't know how to respond to his kindness. She had forgotten how to smile. She didn't even remember the last time she had laughed. Yet every time he came, she felt a little less afraid. One day he found her sitting near the wall, drawing small symbols in the dust. "What are those?" he asked curiously. "Songs," she said quietly. "Valari writes songs with shapes. Lines mean sound. Circle means heart." He looked closely at the patterns. They looked like spirals and waves, beautiful flowing marks. "They're lovely," he said sincerely. She tilted her head. "No one ever say that." "Well," he said, "then let me be the first." For a moment she looked at him carefully as if searching for a lie. But his expression was calm and honest. A tiny spark of trust began to grow between them. Weeks passed and the sound of Elias's footsteps became something Irina waited for. The light in her cell no longer felt lonely. She began to talk a little more, telling him short stories of her home, the glowing rivers, the soft trees that sang when the wind passed through them, and the sky full of blue moons. When she spoke, her voice grew stronger and her eyes seemed to shine again. Elias listened with quiet attention, his heart heavy with guilt. He had seen the destruction caused by war, but hearing it from someone who had lived through it made it real in a way no report could. One afternoon, he asked gently, "Do you wish to go back?" Irina looked down. "My world." "Gone," she whispered. "No forest, no song, only ashes." "I'm sorry," he said softly. She looked up again. "You not make war?" "No," he said. "But I'm human and maybe that makes me part of it." She shook her head slowly. "You not same. You see me." Those 3 words, "you see me," stayed with him long after he left. In his world of orders and rules, it was easy to forget that every decision touched real lives. Now when he walked through the halls of the embassy or listened to political speeches, he felt a quiet anger rise inside. So many powerful people talked about peace, yet ignored the pain hidden beneath it. He began to ask questions in meetings, carefully but firmly. How many prisoners are still in those lower tunnels? Why are some of them unregistered? Are we sure the Vorthons are following Alliance law? The answers were vague, dismissive. Those are old matters, Commander. Not your concern. But he couldn't accept that anymore. One evening, Elias arrived at the prison again, carrying a small silver pendant, a symbol of the human alliance, shaped like a star. He handed it to Irina through the small gap in the glass. "This is for you," he said. "It's a reminder of light, to never forget who you are." She held it carefully in her trembling hands. The metal was smooth and warm from his touch. "Gift?" she asked in disbelief. Yes, he replied. A gift? Irina looked at him for a long time. Then, for the first time in years, she smiled. It was small and shy, but it was real. That single smile made him realize something deep inside. That one act of kindness could mean more than all the grand speeches in the universe. But not everyone was pleased. The chief warden, a stern Vorthon named Krell, began to notice the commander's repeated visits. He didn't like humans interfering with his domain. Commander Ward, he said coldly one morning, you are spending a great deal of time with that creature. Elias replied evenly. She's not a creature. She's a living being. Krell's sharp eyes narrowed. Be careful, human. Our alliance is new and fragile. Stirring pity for our prisoners will not help peace. Peace built on cruelty isn't peace, Elias said quietly. Krell's expression darkened, but he said nothing more. Elias knew then that his visits were being watched. But it didn't stop him. If anything, it made him more determined. That night when he visited again, Irina sensed something different in his tone. He seemed troubled. Something wrong? She asked softly. Nothing for you to worry about, he said, though his eyes told another story. Just politics, she tilted her head. Politics make you sad. He laughed quietly. Yes, sometimes they do. Irina looked at the light device beside her and then at the pendant in her hand. You bring light, she said slowly. Maybe you can bring it to them too. Her words touched him deeply. For someone who had lost everything, she still believed in light. That kind of strength humbled him. He promised himself silently that he would protect that light and whatever it took. That night, as Irina fell asleep, she dreamed of her home again. But this time it wasn't dark or silent. She saw the glowing rivers, the singing trees, and among them, a tall human standing under the blue moons holding out his hand. When she woke, her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. For the first time in many years, her dream hadn't been about pain. It had been about hope. And far above, Commander Elias Ward looked out at the stars from his ship's balcony, wondering if maybe, just maybe, a small act of mercy could change the future of both their worlds. The deep tunnels of Vorthon Prime were silent except for the echo of dripping water. The air was cold and damp, filled with the smell of metal and dust. Somewhere inside that darkness, behind layers of steel and stone, lived a creature that few dared to mention, a creature that once had a name, but now only had a number. Her name was Irina, though even she had almost forgotten it. She sat in a small cage made of hard glass and black alloy. A single dim light flickered above her, its glow weak and tired like her spirit. Years of captivity had turned her world into endless gray walls and quiet suffering. Once Irina had been a proud member of the Valari, a gentle race from the forests of the moon Lithora. Her people loved music and the sound of the wind in the trees. They built their homes among glowing rivers and shining crystals. But that life had been taken from her when the Vorthons invaded her world. They said the Valari were simple and weak, but in truth, they were kind, too kind to fight. The Vorthons took many of them as slaves or experiments, calling them lesser forms, and so Irina was brought to Vorthon Prime, far from home, far from sunlight, far from the voice of her family. Years passed. She stopped counting them. Her voice became soft, her hope became thin, and her heart grew quiet. The guards rarely spoke to her. They only opened the door to bring her food, a tasteless paste served in a metal bowl. Sometimes scientists would come and study her, writing notes about her eyes, her skin, her blood, but no one ever looked at her as a person. She had learned not to look back at them. It only hurt more. One morning something different happened. The heavy doors of the lower prison opened and footsteps echoed through the hall. There were more voices than usual, firm, calm, and filled with authority. Irina heard words in a language she didn't fully know, but she recognized the tone. Inspection. The guards were nervous. They cleaned the floors, adjusted their armor, and whispered to each other. Irina watched quietly through the bars. Then she saw him. He was tall, dressed in a dark uniform with silver lines across the chest. A human. His name was Commander Elias Ward, an officer of the Human Alliance. He had come to Vorthon Prime to check on the prison facilities after the recent peace treaty. Elias walked slowly through the hall, scanning the cells with a professional eye. He had seen many places like this before, and places filled with silence and sorrow. But something about this one felt different. The air felt too still, too heavy. As he walked past each cell, he saw alien prisoners in poor condition, malnourished, frightened, broken. His jaw tightened. His orders were simple: make a report and return to the surface. But his conscience whispered that there was more to see here. Then he reached cell 47. At first, it looked empty. He almost moved on, but something inside made him stop. A soft sound came from the corner, a faint movement like someone breathing very quietly. "Who's in there?" he asked. The guard beside him shrugged. "Just one of the old experiments, sir. Been here for years. Not dangerous anymore." Elias frowned. "Open it." The guard hesitated. "Sir, it's not necessary." "Open it," Elias repeated, this time more firmly. With a nervous sigh, the guard pressed a code into the panel. The door slid open with a hiss. Inside, in the dim light, he saw her. Irina sat with her knees drawn to her chest, her head resting on her arms. Her skin glowed faintly in the darkness, and a natural shimmer the Volari were known for. But it was dull now, faded like an old painting. Chains hung loosely from her wrists, not to hold her anymore, but as a reminder that she once had no freedom at all. Elias took a step closer, his voice gentle. "Can you understand me?" Irina flinched. The sound of kindness was something she hadn't heard in years. She raised her head slowly. Her eyes were large and bright blue, but empty, as if the stars inside them had died long ago. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Elias felt a tightness in his chest. This wasn't an animal. This wasn't an experiment. This was someone. "What is her name?" he asked the guard quietly. The guard looked uncomfortable. "She doesn't have one anymore, sir. Records say she's Volari. Captured in the Lithora campaign. We call her Subject V7. Elias turned sharply. "A person has a name, not a number." The guard looked down, avoiding his eyes. Irina's gaze followed Elias as he turned to leave. She didn't speak, or she no longer had the strength. But something deep inside her stirred. For the first time in a long time, she saw recognition in someone's eyes. It was small, but it was hope. That night, back in his quarters, Elias couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, staring at the report he was supposed to write. His orders were clear. Record the facility's condition. Mention nothing that could harm relations with the Vorthons. But his conscience burned. He could still see her, the light in her eyes that tried to shine through years of darkness. He opened his notebook and began to write, but his words didn't sound like a report. They sounded like a confession. "The Vorthon prison holds more than prisoners. It holds forgotten lives. I have seen one of them, a Volari woman in cell 47. She is treated like an object. I do not know her story, but I can see it in her eyes. She has suffered, yet she still breathes. There must be something worth saving in that." He stopped writing, his hands trembling slightly. He knew he couldn't include that in the official record. It would never reach anyone who cared. Still, he made a quiet promise to himself. If fate gave him a chance, he would help her. The next day, he returned to the prison. The guards looked surprised. "Back again, sir? You've already finished your inspection." Elias gave a calm nod. "I forgot something." He walked straight to cell 47. When Irina saw him again, she didn't move. Her eyes followed him with curiosity and caution. He brought something with him, a small device that created light, like a gentle sunbeam. He placed it on the floor near her cell. The light filled the dark space, revealing the dust and the faded marks on the walls. "I thought you might like to see something bright," he said softly. Irina didn't answer. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She just looked at the light, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she whispered something in a soft voice, barely audible. "Why?" Elias blinked. "Why what?" She looked up slowly. Her voice was fragile, like it might break at any moment. "Why, you kind?" He didn't know what to say at first. Then he smiled. Not a forced or polite smile, but a real one. "Because you deserve to be treated like a person." The words echoed in the small room. Irina's eyes widened slightly. No one had said such words to her in years. When Elias left, she stayed awake for a long time, staring at the small beam of light still glowing near her feet. It was such a small thing, yet it filled the room with warmth she hadn't felt since she was taken from her home. That night, she whispered her own name to herself again, quietly, as if afraid the walls would take it away. "Irina," she said. "My name is Irina." Far above the prison, the city lights of Vorth and Prime flickered like stars. But deep below, in that forgotten cell, something brighter than any city light had begun to awaken. Hope. And though neither of them knew it yet, that one act of mercy was about to change not just two lives, but the course of worlds. The horizon drifted through the endless sea of stars. Illyra sat quietly in her cabin, hands resting on the edge of the window. She had grown stronger in the past weeks, stronger in body, but even more so in heart. Her chains were gone, and the fear that once filled her mind had been replaced with something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Outside, the stars moved slowly past the viewport. She thought about her home, her people, and everything she had lost. Yet for the first time, she did not feel helpless. She had humans beside her, friends who had risked everything to save her, and now she wanted to protect them in return. On the bridge, Commander Jason Hale observed the star field, mind alert to any danger. The crew moved with calm precision, but the energy in the room was tense. The Velrathi Dominion was still out there, a looming threat. Jason knew it was only a matter of time before they would have to face them again. "Report," he said softly. Marcus tapped the console. "Scanners show no enemy ships nearby. We're clear, for now." Lena Ortiz leaned back in her chair, eyes tired but shining with relief. "Let's hope they stay that way." Jason turned and saw Illyra standing quietly at the back of the bridge. Her glow was faint but steady, like a small star holding its own in darkness. "You're quiet," he said. "I think," she replied simply. "About everything," Jason nodded. "Good thoughts?" She smiled faintly. "Yes, about humans and then home. And friends." He walked closer. "Illyra, you've changed a lot since the day we found you. You've grown stronger, braver, and I think you've taught all of us something too." Illyra tilted her head. "Taught?" Jason nodded. "Yes, about courage, hope, and heart. About how humans fight not just with weapons but with kindness." She studied him quietly, then nodded. "I understand. I want help others too." In the following days, the Horizon's crew began helping others across the galaxy. Reports of enslaved races trapped in hidden Velrathi colonies reached their sensors. The Horizon became a small, moving sanctuary. Illyra worked alongside them, guiding the ship with her powers, protecting their shields, and lending her strength where needed. Her control had grown precise. No longer was her energy unpredictable. Now it moved with intention, responding to her will and the needs of her human friends. Every rescue mission reminded her of her own past. She remembered the chains, the fear, and the hopelessness. But now she used her knowledge to save others, to show them what the humans had shown her, that life could be more than pain, that freedom could be real, and that compassion was a weapon stronger than any gun. One quiet evening, Illyra sat in the ship's common area with Lena. They had finished a long day of repairs and preparation for their next mission. The stars outside glimmered faintly, reflecting off the polished surfaces of the horizon. "Do you miss your home?" Lena asked gently. Illyra thought for a moment. "Yes, sometimes. My world, beautiful but gone now." Lena nodded. "We understand. But look at you. You've built a new home here. A home with friends who care about you." Illyra smiled softly. "Yes, my home." For the first time, she said the word without fear or sadness. It felt like hers. Meanwhile, Commander Jason prepared for their most challenging mission yet. Intelligence indicated a Velrathi stronghold, a massive fortress on a remote planet holding hundreds of enslaved beings. This would be their largest rescue operation yet, and perhaps the most dangerous. Jason gathered the crew. "This mission will test all of us," he said firmly. "We'll face strong enemies and traps, but we have something they don't: courage, intelligence, and each other." He looked at Illyra. "You've been with us through fire and battle. Your strength and heart have saved this ship more than once. Will you help us again?" Illyra's hands glowed faintly blue. She nodded. "Yes, we saved them." "Like you saved me," Jason smiled. "Then let's go." The Horizon approached the planet quietly, cloaked in stealth. The fortress below was massive, its towers rising like dark spikes against the gray surface. Velrothi guards patrolled the surface, unaware of the human ship hovering above. Jason piloted the horizon with precision, navigating between energy shields and radar beams. Elira's powers enhanced the ship's stealth, bending light and energy around them. It was tense, but the crew trusted each other, and Elira had become their strongest ally. They landed near the central holding area. Elira stepped off the ship with Jason, the human crew surrounding her. The alien woman felt her heart pound. Fear and excitement blended together. But she was not alone. She had friends. She had purpose. The team moved carefully through the stronghold, disabling traps and freeing prisoners. Elira's glow guided them through dark corridors, her energy shielding them from security systems and alert beams. Every freed being looked at her in wonder. To them, she was no longer a prisoner or an experiment. She was a savior, a symbol of hope. Jason led the way, but he watched Elira closely. He saw the strength she had gained not only in her powers but in her spirit. She had grown into someone truly remarkable. At one point, a Velrothi patrol appeared. Elira stepped forward, hands glowing, and sent a pulse of energy that knocked their weapons aside without harming them. The humans and prisoners passed safely. For the first time, Elira's power was fully controlled and purposeful. "Impressive," Jason whispered, watching her. "You've truly become human in heart. Brave, kind, and strong." Elira glanced at him. "I try. I learn from you." The rescue was a success. Hundreds of beings escaped from the Velrothi fortress. Many for the first time in their lives. They looked at the humans and Elira with gratitude, eyes wide with wonder. To them, this small ship and its crew represented the impossible. Freedom in the face of fear. Jason watched from the bridge as the freed beings boarded the horizon. "This is why we fight," he said softly. "Not for power, not for glory, but to protect and save others." Elira stood beside him, glowing faintly. She had come so far, from chains and abuse to courage and hope. She had learned what humans could teach: kindness, bravery, and the strength to protect others even when danger loomed. Months passed. The horizon became a legend across the galaxy. News of humans and their alien ally rescuing the oppressed spread quickly. Elira traveled with them, guiding the ship, protecting lives, and learning more about humanity each day. She had finally understood the lesson Jason had taught her, that true power did not lie in domination or cruelty, but in courage, kindness, and the willingness to risk everything for others. One evening, Elira stood at the observation deck looking at the stars. Jason joined her. "You've changed the galaxy," he said softly. "No," she replied. "We together." Jason nodded. "Together. That's the point. Humans alone can't do it, but when we stand with others, anything is possible." She smiled faintly, feeling warmth in her heart. "I feel human now." Jason looked at her and smiled. "You always were, Elira. Just needed to believe it." As the horizon sailed on, Elira looked at the stars and thought of her old world. She felt lost but no longer despair. She had found something more valuable than a home planet. She had found a family, a purpose, and the knowledge that one being, brave and kind, could make a difference. And she knew that wherever the Velrothi lurked, wherever danger appeared, humanity's light would shine. Not because of weapons or strength, but because of the hearts that refused to give up on anyone, no matter how small or powerless they seemed. Elira pressed her hand to the glass and whispered to herself, "We protect. We save, we hope. We are human in heart." The stars stretched endlessly before her, but she no longer feared the darkness. She had found her place in the galaxy. She had found her purpose. And for the first time in her life, Elira smiled freely, feeling truly free.